Hello, everyone. We are live again on Level Up Law with another great episode coming to you from South Carolina Legal Services. Today on Level Up Law, we are excited to welcome two excellent attorneys, Michael Large and Kirby Mitchell. Michael is a member of the law office of Deirdre Edmonds, located in Surfside Beach. Boy, I wish I was there right now. His practice focuses on the aging population and people with disabilities. He has all kinds of experience in the areas of elder law, supported decision-making, guardianship, conservatorship, all those things that we'll be needing his great background for today in our episode. Kirby Mitchell, who is an attorney here at South Carolina Legal Services, and Kirby is the managing attorney of our upstate Medical Legal Partnership with South Carolina Legal Services, Furman University, and also Prisma Health. So he brings a wealth of knowledge as well. Now, remember, every Tuesday at noon, South Carolina Legal Services is leveling up your legal knowledge, and today will be no exception. I want you to be listening in both today and next week for a two-part series on long-term care facilities. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. I'm Susan Ingles. I am a senior staff attorney and consumer law unit head here at South Carolina Legal Services, and I am going to be the host of the webinar today, and welcome in Kenneth Elliott, who is our excellent producer from our IT department here at Legal Services. So we'll get started in just a minute, but I just want to talk a little bit about what we'll be discussing today, which is essentially long-term care facilities and what you and your loved ones may face when that need arises in your family, how the process begins, as well as what you face when you're transitioning into rehab or long-term nursing care, as well as transferring out of that care. Now, we've made this a two-part series because there is so much information that we have and that our guests here have expertise in. So we'll be talking a little bit about that today, and then we'll have part two, and we'll tell you more about that at the end of today's episode. So we're going to get going with that in just a moment. But first, as always, remember, this is not legal advice that we're giving today. It's just information, general information for you, the public. And so keep that in mind. If you have legal issues, you should always consult with an attorney, whether it's here at Legal Services, if you qualify or eligible for our services, or with a private attorney such as Mike Large. We'll be giving you our contact information at the end of this presentation in the event that you do need that, that information. So a recording of the webcast, I need to remind you, will be on our YouTube channel pretty quickly. In the next day or so. Kenneth is great about getting those uploaded, so you can go to the Level Up Law playlist on our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to see this episode as well as all the other episodes from this last year of our series. So definitely go there and check that out. So again, thanks so much for joining us, and gentlemen, let's get started.
Sounds good.
All right. So let's go to Mike first. You know, sometimes a person has a slow decline, so long-term care is something that's already been being considered or talked about, and then there's, you know, maybe they've even been researching it, but sometimes it comes as sort of a, you know, a thud, you know, a slap in the face. All of a sudden you're faced with this and you just haven't thought about the process, what you're going to need to do. Can you describe sort of what you do, maybe some scenarios that bring a client to you in the first place, and kind of what we can expect at an initial consultation?
Sure. You know, as an elder law attorney, I'm often asked about nursing homes and elder care options, and you know, I view it as the legal solution is typically interconnected with medical, financial considerations, the family dynamic, right? And so you need a holistic, interdisciplinary approach to trying to solve these complex, often complex problems, right? It takes the collective impact of a great many people. And so there's a couple classic scenarios that I deal with initially with a potential client. One would be, it's a husband and wife, they've been doing great, but the husband now has just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, okay? And they're shell shocked. They don't even know where to start. They probably have only just recently gotten a diagnosis from a neurologist or maybe their, primary care physician, and they're just at the very beginning. Another type of scenario that comes into play is everything has been going fine for the aging couple until somebody falls. They get sent to the hospital, okay? And now, after being in the hospital, it's not safe for them to be discharged home right away. And so they have to go and be discharged to a rehab facility, and then maybe coming home, maybe not, right? And that's another scenario that often happens, which is slightly different. And then the third one is you've been caring for a loved one for a while, and now you've reached the end of your ability. Something has happened where you're just not quite sure that you can do it anymore, or that it's safe at home, or maybe they've fallen and you've had to call 911 to get them literally picked up off the ground and get the help that they need, right? And so it's those types of scenarios that I often deal with. And so depending on how, who I'm talking with, there's a few things that I always need to know. First off, what is this person's medical condition, right? The person that's needing the care, because quite frankly, I think all of us are oftentimes speaking to the caregivers, right? Whether it's the spouse or the adult child, or even new parents with a child transitioning that has a disability, they're transitioning to adulthood. It's typically the caregivers. And so, you're trying to find out what is the individual who needs the help, what is their medical condition? Is this a situation where they're expected to live for a long time, or is death imminent? Those kinds of things you really need to know up front. The next thing is the family dynamic. Who's here, right? Is this a caring, loving family? Is this a blended family? Is there even any family in South Carolina? Is this a retired couple that has just moved down here? They retired and now this has hit them and they don't really have family, because we need to look for a solution through the prism of the family dynamic. And then, of course, eventually it comes around to assets and their ability to pay for the care that's necessary. Do they have long-term care insurance? Do they have any assets? Do they have nothing? Are they going to have to immediately go toward Medicaid, which we can talk about later on, I'm pretty sure we're going to, and Medicaid planning, which is a whole different thing. So, and oftentimes they haven't even had an assessment done for inside their home, right? A geriatric care assessment, because nobody wants to ship their loved one off, and a loving family that is, to a nursing home right away. That's never the first option. It's always about what can you do at home.
And so often you have that family dynamic of that person has always been promised, you won't ever have to be in a nursing home, mom or dad or whoever. And, besides trying to make decisions for the individual who's going to have to go to that long-term care, the stress and guilt and all of those things that are falling on the person who's having to make the decision, and they've got it coming from all ends. So yeah, there's so much to think about.
And that's the Kleenex moment right there. That promise is the hardest one, because when you get married till death do you part, does that mean that you're going to care for your spouse until you've either run yourself emotionally ragged and physically ragged to the point where you're not having any quality of life, and it's not safe for that person, that loved one, to be in the house anymore, and you've gone past that. So you kind of have to navigate and come to terms with that particular promise that a lot of us make to our loved ones to help them, live at home and independently as long as possible.
Sometimes I knew of a couple who, one of them had a fall, and when the other one went to, they lived together, in an apartment, And so the one person had a fall and the other one tried to go to their aid and then had a fall themselves, and they ended up side by side in the hospital, the two of them. So that's a great point that you make about the, sort of the help of someone who may be the caregiver.
That's right, and there are options. Starting this process out, one of the first things I ask is, have you had anyone like a nurse come into your home, take a look at your house, examine the person that needs the care, right, to get an assessment of, is this even feasible to do, or are there renovations to make it more medically accessible to the person that needs this kind of help, and who are the caregivers that we're going to have to come in and assist. Oftentimes around 24/7, right? Because you're going to need respite as a caregiver no matter what at some point in time. You can't do it. You're going to sleep, right? And you're going to need to have some time away from that duty.
And sometimes there's hospitalization involved. Sometimes there's just this sort of diagnosis moment. Kirby, in your medical legal partnership, tell us a little bit about the players that you all see in these situations.
Yeah, thanks, Susie. I'm talking to you today from my office here at Prisma Health in Greenville. So I'm a legal aid lawyer like you, but we're embedded right in the health system. So it goes right to your question. We are trying to assess health harming civil legal needs, kind of working hand in hand with social workers, nurse practitioners, doctors who see things that come in and present as medical, but as part of the solution or best response, you need some legal action. And so it's really exactly what Mike's talking about. We hope that we have time to plan and talk about and think about these very things. But like you said, sometimes it comes with a thud or it's a surprise or such a shock that these decisions about what do we do about care sometimes are made at home, but sometimes made from the hospital. So those are two of the most common ways these decisions are made. And who makes these decisions, you ask, and how are they made? Well, we like to primarily characterize that as a medically based decision. The decision to go to a nursing home, for example, if I today just decided to go to a nursing home, no, that would not be a welcome event by nursing home. It is a medical facility primarily, and of course there's a range, and we have many evolving options with care. But yeah, it remains essentially a medically based decision. So you need a doctor or a physician or medical professional to be part of that decision. But who else? Like Mike referred to, it's a team. You really want an attorney. You want someone who knows the family, but never forget the primary decision maker is the actual patient. And of course, we're often running into capacity issues and capacity considerations. Mike referred to the caregivers, often adult children or other family members. But listen, it starts with the actual person and patient. If there hasn't been planning or some legal action, creating a guardianship or power of attorney or some other proxy decision maker, that patient should be and always will be the primary member of that team making that decision, hard as that is.
That's a great point, Kirby. You have to always identify who the client is, and it's always going to be the individual who's suffering as long as they have capacity. And you would hope that they would have the ability at that point in time, if they don't have a durable power of attorney or healthcare power of attorney. These are advanced directives that while a person's living can name an agent to help them with those types of financial and healthcare decisions. Our laws changed drastically in South Carolina on January 1st, 2019. And so guardianship and conservatorship, you got to view that as a last resort. You don't want to go there. You have to look at the informal supports and assistance available with family and friends, right, that can help the individual. You have to look to these formal supports and assistance, which will come from the medical field, which will come maybe as part of a legal solution, which, you know, there's many other things. You might have to move real estate around. We might be talking to the financial planner who's, you know, been controlling the funds for a number of years for these individuals. So yeah, you're always looking to identify the client first and foremost. So I agree.
And I think sometimes
let me quickly say, Susie, the term physician or medical professional, you know, that's evolving a lot too. Until very recently, I didn't know what a DO was. I thought all doctors were MDs, but there's a whole range. There's nurse practitioners now that are really the primary caregiver to care provider to a lot of Medicaid and Medicare patients, a lot of children, a lot of seniors. So I just wanted to mention that real quick. Your knowledge, if you haven't been keeping up like I wasn't, of who a medical professional is today that can be part of this team and can make the necessary assessments and sign affidavits, that is evolving and changing a lot in South Carolina and across the United States.
Yeah, and sometimes those are the very individuals that you're mentioning, and those sort of that level of position may be the one who is closer to the patient, and they're kind of knowing what's going on with them day to day, or closer to the family and knowing what Mike said at the very beginning, what that family dynamic is. And I think one thing I wanted to mention about us, you know, as attorneys, it's a similar thing with the medical profession. Lots of times we think that people know all this stuff that we're talking about, you know, depending on, you know, who we're dealing with and stuff. And it always surprises me what people don't know. I know there's a lot I don't know about the medical field. There's a lot I don't know about other, you know, areas and other fields. You know, I know my own area, and so sometimes, you know, we forget that people don't know. For example, I know this is something we see all the time, and y'all may see this too, but lots of times people don't realize that a person who has Alzheimer's or some form of dementia, doesn't have that mental capacity, can't grant someone their power of attorney. And a lot of times people don't realize that it's the person who is suffering is the one who needs to give that power of attorney to someone. And as you guys mentioned, that durable power of attorney is something that really needs to happen early on in your planning as an adult, so that you know, don't run into those kind of issues. It's surprising to me how many times I'll have somebody call and say, you know, I need to get my father's power of attorney. What do I need to sign? And you know, you're not the one that signs that. They are, and they have to have that capacity.
That's oftentimes not available in crisis planning, right? Because now the individual is so physically or mentally incapacitated that they just cannot even probably understand what we're talking about, let alone have contractual capacity, which is required for a durable power of attorney. You know, some attorneys don't have an eye particularly for Medicaid planning and for incapacity issues. And I'll give you, for instance, I love you, Wills, right? Everything to my spouse, and then if my spouse predeceases me, to my children in equal shares, right? Share and share alike. But if one of the spouses needs to qualify for Medicaid and go to a skilled nursing home, you don't want that spouse to receive all the money, because then they're going to have to spend the inheritance down. First off, they might not qualify for Medicaid, right? Because they got this lump sum of money. And secondly, you don't want them to have to spend that down. That has to be protected. That fund has to go to they have to receive an inheritance in a supplemental needs trust. And you're going to want to limit the amount of funds going to that spouse. And yet, if this was done just a few years prior, before any of these issues arose, that wasn't even a consideration at that time. And so you think you have everything squared away, but meanwhile, you know, your durable lists your spouse who's now ill as the agent under a durable and making healthcare decisions, and they can't do any of that now. And so you don't have appropriate backups. You've got issues with that too. So it's not just the public, it's other attorneys that either didn't know of the issue or really aren't well versed in that type of planning.
Well, I'd like for both of y'all to address some of these financial considerations. But before we get into that, I do want to encourage our audience. There is a question box that you'll see on your screen, and we definitely encourage you to ask any questions that you might have. Of course, like I said at the beginning, we can't give legal advice, but we may be able to lead you in the right direction, give you some general information. So please don't hesitate to ask a question in the question box if you have one. So, this might be a good time to go to Kirby on the PACE program.
Well, sure. Yeah, Susie, thanks. I've been impressed with, like we talked about, a lot of families do plan ahead to the extent they can. They have these difficult conversations. They execute advance directives. And the medical providers in South Carolina are good about getting copies of healthcare power of attorney, durable power of attorney. So having that information of who they can talk to and who can consent. But yeah, there's a lot of financial limits and considerations for folks that the best care or maybe the right care just doesn't seem financially possible. So I wanted to mention briefly today a program that I think can be really wonderful for families with lower financial resources that are facing this situation, either making the decision from home that they have a loved one who's in decline and needs some more assistance, or if you're coming from a facility, from a hospital, going through a formal discharge procedure to seeing what level of care is needed. There's something called the PACE program. That's an acronym. It's been around, I think, 25 or 30 years across the country, but it stands for Program for All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly. And so it's a Medicaid Healthy Connections, a state plan here in South Carolina. You can go to the website and learn about it. But basically, to summarize, it's just a state plan that provides comprehensive care that allows frail or elderly participants to stay in their home, to live in their home, but during the day, or maybe multiple times a week, maybe 5 days a week, maybe 3 different hours, they are at a PACE facility where they have medical professionals, nurses, people that help with medications, monitoring. They have social activities, they have therapies. So someone like an adult caregiver can still work, can still keep a bedroom and bathroom and the family pet and everything that the loved one can still interact with all the time in the evenings and on the weekends. But it allows families to keep their loved one well cared for, I think, and also in the community and at home as long as possible. But the beauty of the PACE program, if you qualify for Medicaid, Medicare, what we call dual eligibles, and you can go to their website and see and apply and see if this is right for you, that's the full payment that the PACE program accepts. So whatever care that your loved one gets, therapies, medications, even hospitalizations, or during the time that they're at PACE, that's all covered under Medicaid, Medicare. So that's referred to as a capitated system. It's really popular around the country. It's proven to be pretty effective and wonderful for health and for the financial health of several hospitals. There's 4 programs in the Midlands that have been successful with PACE for 20 some years, and we have one here in Greenville. I get a lot of medical legal partnership cases from the PACE program here because there are some health harming barriers or some legal barriers to people getting into PACE, or sometimes we see, for example, bed bugs or something in a home that we really have to deal with a landlord or something to prevent that from becoming a broader health problem. So I just wanted to mention PACE. Mike can talk about making these financial considerations and decisions for all kinds of clients, the private clients he sees. But as a legal aid lawyer, I just really encourage everyone to consider PACE if it's available in your community.
Yeah. And we'll put a link to that information in the description box below on when we post this to YouTube. Mike, can you kind of elaborate on the whole Medicaid planning process a little bit?
Absolutely, but I'd like to just point out to those watching us today that I'm an SCLS alumni. I used to be a staff attorney and elder law unit head, And I learned a great deal through my years there about the interconnected issues. The holistic approach is vital for lower income families. And Kirby made me think of the elderly person who calls one of their AAAs and says, my water was turned off. And if you don't ask enough questions, you wouldn't know whether or not they own the home, which then you're trying to get, right, a plumber in, or if they're renting. And if they're renting, then it's under the Landlord Tenant Act, and there's a whole different way of dealing with that issue. And so I oftentimes find in private practice that these interconnected issues are always seem to be there for adults with disabilities in our aging population, just in general. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It seems to always flow that way. But with regard to Medicaid, for those of you that don't know, I mean, it's a federally funded program. It's massive, right? Congress allots the money and sends them off to all 50 states, and each state promulgates its own rules and regulations. So I always tell clients, don't listen to family members in another state, because that's not necessarily how we do things in South Carolina. And when you're looking at Medicaid, there's really two things you're looking at. Medical eligibility, right? And so we have these activities of daily living, you know, and if you have trouble with two of the activities of daily living, you're going to qualify for medically, and they do an assessment. And those are eating, walking, bathing, dressing, toileting, and transferring to and from a bed, okay? But assuming the person meets the requirement medically, which is often the case, the focus then becomes on financial eligibility. Now, I'm just doing this from a 30,000-foot view, educational point of, you know, perspective. This is not meant to be legal advice to your specific situation. But, you know, you're always looking at the person who needs to be admitted, right, to the nursing home for skilled nursing home care, or maybe you can qualify for a home and community-based waiver, which is the same set of criteria, both medically and financially for Medicaid, okay? And so financially, the income is very rarely an issue. In 2021, you can't have more than $2,382 in income, and that's passive income counts too. So Social Security, pensions, wherever your annuity, wherever you're getting it from, it can't be over that. But there's oftentimes a simple solution of an income trust for the income. So that's not the issue. The issue becomes the asset. We're a hard asset cap state. $2,000 is the maximum after exemptions. So you can exempt out the home that you live in and a car. You can have some life insurance up to $10,000 on the face value and prepaid burial. There's exemptions. But after that, there's a pot of money. And so the issue is, you know, how much money is there? And they're also going to look, Medicaid is like the IRS. They look back 5 years, and they don't need a subpoena or any of that. Once you sign that application, they can go get all those bank records. They can get all of that information. And so they're going to look to see if you've made any transfers in the last 5 years where you either gifted something away to a loved one, right? Or you transferred it for less than fair market value for purposes of qualifying for Medicaid. And once, you know, and then that becomes its own set of issues, because they don't want you to be able to give away 200 grand on Monday, apply for Medicaid on Tuesday, and then get admitted to the nursing home on Wednesday, right? That's the whole point of that. And so it's a very complex area of the law, but Medicaid, for those of us, it's primarily for the middle and lower class of America. It's for 98% of us. And so if you don't have long-term care insurance, which a lot of folks don't, or you're not extremely wealthy and you can pay for those costs, then you need Medicaid to pay for that skilled long-term nursing home care. And so then that comes into the issue of, you know, what facility, what nursing home is right for your loved one, right? Have you done your due diligence? And do they have Medicaid certified beds? Now, oftentimes they're going to have a big chunk that are private pay, but they're going to set aside some beds that are for Medicaid. And so that's basically, you know, what clients are looking for when we start having this type of conversation is, you know, how do I qualify for the Medicaid, and what's the appropriate facility for my loved one after we can no longer care for them in the home?
Right, and I guess you also have to think about maybe if you have private funds that you can pay for a facility, but that's may not be an infinite amount, and so there may come a time when you can't pay for that anymore, and then you have to transfer over into the Medicaid side of things, and that's why it's so important what you're saying to think about those things at the beginning, even if you're not on Medicaid at the time.
Yeah, the average cost of a nursing home is somewhere in the area of $7,000 to $8,000. You do the math. After a year's worth of time, you've blown close to $80,000 plus, depending on what your loved one needs, right? So you're going to burn through that life savings very quickly. Now, if you're married, there are ways to shift assets to the community spouse, because typically a husband and a wife don't go into the nursing home at the same time. So they don't, there are avenues of relief for the spouse that's going to live at home, right? And then be sort of a secondary caretaker at the nursing home, because I'll tell you right now, in my experience, the nursing home will never care for your loved one and advocate for your loved one the way you can, right? It's just not possible. So, but yeah, it's a huge undertaking, and there's no easy way to do it. And not a lot of attorneys do that kind of area of law, because it's complicated.
I think that goes back to kind of who the players are, whether it be in the medical side, whether it be a social worker, someone at a nursing facility. There's just all these decisions to make, and everybody kind of plays a part in that. But at some point, somebody's got to go ahead and make that decision. And I do think, now let's talk a little bit about the sort of the speed of making those decisions, because as we talked about at the beginning, you may have been thinking about this, your future of long-term care really while you're healthy and mentally fine, and so you've got some things in place, or you've discussed it or thought about it with family members, or you've got this, all of a sudden you've got all these decisions to make. And I do think it's important for people to realize that although there are some things that need to be decided pretty quickly, they don't have to be decided at that very moment. I feel like you can have a little bit of a slowdown where you say, okay, let me just get control of my thoughts on all of this, because everybody has a different perspective, everybody plays a different role. Kirby, what are your thoughts about kind of that situation, as far as, especially if you're in a hospital, and hospitals aren't really meant to provide that rehab or that long-term care, and there's only so long that you can stay in a hospital, and there's a whole procedure there, right? Getting out of there and into a long-term care facility.
That's right. We'll talk more about that next week as well, the discharge process. But there's a very formal discharge process from a hospital if you are going to go back home or go to a facility, and there's federal law and state law that specifies exactly what has to happen there and your rights in that. But yeah, I would love for everyone to have talked about this issue with their loved one before that, and be very specific. Don't just vaguely say, well, we know you don't ever want to go to a home. I say, hey, let's go look at the PACE program. Let's go look at Harbor Gardens. Let's go see, is it possible you would see yourself happy there? Find out, they allow pets. Whoa, that was a huge concern that was never discussed. Most places don't allow pets, but just the point is, get very specific. Do you want it here in Greenville? Would you want to be near your brother, which is an hour away? Let's talk through that, and then you start to force those next steps. I would need a power of attorney executed before I could help you with that in a formal way. So that's what I would say. Like you alluded to, hopefully you can make some of these decisions gradually over time, because what you're really dealing with is a lot of just psychological reaction. It's sad when people decline and age and see their loved ones are going to pass And so that really freezes a lot of decision making about legal issues. So my just one advice would be force that conversation. I did that with my parents. That was not fun, frankly, but it ended in kind of paving the way. My mom is 83 now and in a facility and doing wonderfully. And I really feel great that my sister and brother and I were able to work together, talk through it. There was some tension, there was a little confrontation, but if you know that's coming, don't avoid it. Go ahead and try to break through some of that now.
Yeah, and then when you get to that point where those final things have to happen, or those decisions have got to go ahead and be put into effect, the family can feel some sense of that it's okay, that this is something you've talked about, this is what everybody expected, and there's a lot to be said for having that sort of sense of this is what we wanted to do, this is what we planned.
I really think as much as we know that a doctor is critical, a lawyer is critical, ultimately you have to make the decision, you as the actual patient person or your loved one who has the authority. So don't passively think I'll just defer to what the doctor says or lawyer says. It really doesn't work that way exactly. So that's I would really encourage people to try to have that conversation about all these topics, and it'll lead to you realizing, oh, we don't know these 7 things we need to find out, and just try to work through it.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the importance of sort of a backup support person. You've got brothers and sisters who are kind of working together. Sometimes it's bumpy, but for the most part, you're working together. If someone's alone in this decision making, they really need kind of a backup person, so that they're not so overwhelmed with everything that's coming at them. Don't you think?
And like Mike said, you may think you know something because that's what happened to your brother in North Carolina. Well, that's not necessarily the law of South Carolina. So it front loads and forces you dealing with the reality of what's available to you. You may learn about things like, for example, the PACE program you never heard of. Maybe you have this conversation with your parents' doctor and they have some good advice for you. So try to make that happen as soon as you can.
Yeah, I think educating yourself, doing your due diligence, investigating, it's very important, because if you think about elder care as a pie, we all come in at different angles. There's just so many different angles that somebody enters into this type of issue, and trying to learn about a loved one or your own medical condition, for instance. Like if you're just diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia, oftentimes I'll refer them to our local Alzheimer's Association for support group, right? Because you can learn some things from those families going through it. And I have to tell you, as an elder law attorney, that doesn't mean that I know exactly what the best nursing home facilities are. I know about their reputation, but unless you go there and take the tour, and then I always recommend, after the tour, if it seems like it's a good facility, then go back unannounced. Take a look behind the curtain and see how that place really runs, right? Because now you're empowering yourself with information. And it's great when you have a family that will help each other, right? A brother will serve as, the primary caretaker, and then you've got a sister who's a backup, right? And everybody's helping each other. That's great. But sometimes you don't. Maybe it's just you and your spouse. And so you need to find ways to educate yourself. And the doctor's not going to have all the answers. The lawyer's not going to have all the answers. Your family's not going to have all the answers. But if you do enough of this, you're going to educate yourself and make an informed decision that's good for you and your loved one, right? That's the goal.
Yeah, I think we've really touched on today a lot of the sort of pre-planning things to think about, the immediate planning things to think about when you are faced with this decision and you hadn't made any plans, or some sort of combination of all that can also happen, because you never know what the situation is going to be, even when you sort of set things up. in a way that was intentional. So next week on episode 2, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the problems that arise. And I think we can maybe, Mike, if you want to talk a little bit about that at the moment, so our viewers will know kind of what's coming up next time. But that's one of the things that we'll start examining on episode 2 in this particular series, because we want people to know that, you know, there's documents that have to be signed. Somebody's got to sign those. There's varying, you know, levels of representation of who can sign that. Maybe even the patient themselves are able to sign it, but that paperwork is important. And when you're in this kind of a situation, as we've talked about, with all this information swirling around you, and you're focused on getting your loved one into that important care that they can get, it's like with so many other things. I tell people this all the time in consumer law: read the terms and conditions. You know, if you're buying something on Amazon, did you read the terms and conditions? A lot of us really don't. The same thing applies when you're signing paperwork to get into the nursing home. You're trusting everybody around you. Oh, this is the usual paperwork, but you know, has it been filled in properly? Do you really know what you're signing, and do you really have the authority to sign that on behalf of a person? So there's a lot of things that go into the documentation. There's also you know, like problems that arise, but also you may be discharged from the facility down the road in one way or another, and that's also something that we'll be, you know, wanting to get into a little bit next week. But Mike, you want to just give our viewers we don't seem to have any questions that I can see in the question box, so why don't you give us a little feel for some of those problems that arise, and we can give our viewers a sense of what we'll be talking about on June 22nd in our second episode.
Sure. You know, just briefly, for those of you that don't know, all of our nursing homes in the state of South Carolina are regulated by Department of Health and Environmental Control, DHEC. And so if there's complaints filed against a nursing home, you can go online and take a look at the complaints. The other important agency that's tasked with this particular issue is the Long-Term Care Ombudsman's Office, right? They're tasked with investigating and advocating for patients of nursing homes, residents of nursing homes, when there are complaints about something that's been done improperly. So those are two things you certainly would want to look at when you're investigating a nursing home, and then of course if there's issues arising once they're there. Now, you know, typical problems that applicants to nursing homes face is, first off, limited availability, right, for low-income residents in particular. And so, you know, most nursing homes are independently owned, and they have a wide latitude to reject Medicaid recipients, the admission process, okay? And so financial discrimination comes in many forms, and some degree of financial discrimination is found in almost every nursing home. So that's, you know, it's the admission process is a little different than once you've been admitted to a nursing home, because then you have both state and federal statutes that protect your rights as a resident. So just to put that out there, you're always better if you can private pay for a month or 2 or 3 and then transition to Medicaid than going straight to a Medicaid bed. That often puts those folks at a disadvantage. And then, you know, there's these financial screening and demands for promises to pay privately. There's extensive disclosure that's required, but the nursing home can't seek a written promise to pay. There's specific federal prohibitions against that. And then, of course, we've got lack of suitable and appropriate nursing homes, too far away from the relatives. I mean, if you're in Myrtle Beach and your loved one needs nursing home care, I mean, I love Greenville, but that's a far ride, right? How are you going to get out there, and vice versa? That's not really a viable option. And then, of course, the other issue is some nursing home patients, like if you have Lewy body dementia, there's this physical defiant component to it. And so now the nursing home is unwilling or unable to care for that person with difficult needs, right? And so there's a whole host of problems that can come up. And, you know, one of the things about transferring from nursing home to nursing home, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Doesn't mean that it's going to be a better place. And Kirby can talk to this other issue, hospital discharge planning. It's typically done by a social worker assigned to the patient at admission, and you want a good relationship with them, and they're supposed to do a placement, a care plan out of the hospital that's going to put that person in the best possible position, but there's pressures to bear to get that hospital bed available. And so, you know, they're being torn in two different directions, but I would assume, Kirby, you have some experience with this?
That's a good teaser for next Tuesday, Mike. Yeah, we'll talk about discharge planning when it goes well, what the law is when it doesn't go well, and kind of hopefully give some people a little preview of what to expect with that.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and I think we've covered so well with you guys today, sort of that beginning process, both before you have the need, after you have the need, and it's really great information. Some of the things we've referred to we'll have down in the description box. And, you know, I should have mentioned at the beginning, these two are on the, I think the Elder Law Task Force of the South Carolina Bar Association, and participated in the authorship of a book that's on these very subjects. So we're talking to two know-it-alls, Mr. Know-it-alls, and we're going to have a lot more. There you go.
Let me tell you, Kirby's chapter is excellent. He added some serious substance to this book, newest edition of a practical guide to elder law and special needs law in South Carolina. Franchelle Melender is the principal author and editor. Kirby and I were contributing authors to this book, and I feel honored to be a part of it because it really is the Bible for lawyers that practice this area of law in South Carolina. But you know, elder law is a huge umbrella.
Right.
There's many subjects that fall under that umbrella, and no elder law attorney has expertise in every single aspect of elder law. So, you know, it really is one of those areas where you're a student for the rest of your life, and you can always learn more. But I've been, you know, happy to
start with that
right
awesome, that awesome treatise that these two participated in. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and let me just double check on the questions, and if producer Kenneth can put up our start with our final two slides so our viewers can have information about how to contact legal services, as well as Mike Large will be showing that information as we say adios to these two. Not for long though, they'll be back next week. Great, here's the contact information for legal services, and then in a moment we'll switch to Mike's contact information. But let me first just thank you to Mike Large and Kirby Mitchell for joining us today, and really helpful discussion on this subject, and we look forward to more of the same on different matters, related matters next week. And a big thank you to all of you who joined us today. We really do appreciate you tuning in. We're always looking for important subjects to bring information on to our listeners. And we focus a lot on the cases that we see here at South Carolina Legal Services, but also issues that our clients may run into in other areas of their life. So thanks for continuing to tune in every week on Level Up Law. And of course, as we alluded to, next week on June 22nd, as always on Tuesday at noon, we'll have the follow-up part 2 to this episode, where we'll be talking about some of these things we've mentioned: discharge planning, admissions documentation, and we'll also go over some of the South Carolina law, and particularly some of the case decisions that our appellate courts in South Carolina have issued on some of these topics. So definitely tune in for that. And if you found the presentation helpful today, it will be posted on our YouTube channel under the Level Up Law playlist. So just go to playlist and find the Level Up Law playlist, and there it will be. And if you found it helpful and valuable, we sure do ask that you kind of give it a thumbs up, share it with others that you think it can be helpful to. And also, while you're there, be sure and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already subscribed, and sign up for notifications with that little bell icon. So every time we post an episode, even if you missed out on the live episode, you can go back and watch the recorded version and get all that excellent information. Now, if you have a legal issue and you need assistance, you can see here on the screen how to apply for legal assistance at South Carolina Legal Services. You know, you can call in, and we've got great intake specialists standing by. You can also, though, apply online 24/7. And so if you have problems getting to call in or anything like that, you can always do that online. And then, Kenneth, if you'll move on to our, there's our information about how to get in contact with Mike Lars, who is a private attorney, but as he pointed out, a alumni of South Carolina Legal Services. We were sad to see him go, but loved that he came back to join us for this and is doing great work for his clients down there in Surfside Beach, and probably, I'm sure, all around the state. So here's Mike's contact information. Do keep an eye on our South Carolina Legal Services Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram, all those great social media spots. That's where you'll find information about upcoming episodes of Level Up Law. Again, be sure and tune in next week for part 2 on our episode series about long-term care facilities and some of the things that you need to be thinking about when considering that. So that's going to conclude today's webinar, but we sure do thank you for joining in and look forward to you tuning in with us again every Tuesday at noon. Thanks, everybody.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.